So as you've probably discovered, this podcast is now known as Podcasting Strategy Simplified. Before this, it was known as Let's Blow This Up. And I just recently went through the rebranding phase to get to this new name. And there are many reasons why I did that, and I'm going to explain all that in a few moments. But something I discovered along the way as I was going through this rebrand is that there are a lot of people out there, perhaps even you, thinking about going down a different road with their show. Maybe not changing the content, but maybe changing the name to get something that's a little bit more on par with what they're doing today. So if you're thinking about rebranding your podcast, you've come to the right place, because I'm going to lay out 5 things that you need to be aware of as you go down this path. My name is Jason Sircone, and this is Podcasting Strategy Simplified. So as I said, going down the road of rebranding, it's a big decision. I've done it before. I've done it with a podcast in the past. I've done it with my business. But what I've discovered in doing that is you learn a lot, but ultimately you get to where you're meant to be. I think we get locked into this fallacy. I'm going to cover this whole sunk cost fallacy in more detail here in a moment, but we get locked in to putting time and effort into a certain direction and then being afraid to deviate from it because of any traction we may have gained. But if the traction we've gained is not going to serve our greater purpose, then what the hell are we doing? Why would we continue going down a road? It's like knowing you're lost and the GPS telling you you're lost, or your significant other in the passenger seat saying you're lost, turn around, but you continue to go down that road thinking that you're going to get to that destination that you seek. So I want to take some time today, not just to outline what you should be aware of if you're thinking of going down this road, but I want to dig deeper into my story and talk about why I decided to change the name of the show. I figure this is a perfect way to kick off the content here on Podcasting Strategy Simplified, since this is so fresh on my mind. But as I discovered just in having conversations with people, I think it's on the minds of many. And it was not something I was seeking. I more or less, from my standpoint, was trying to get some guidance and advice and tips. And, hey, have you ever done this before? What should I be thinking about? Just reaching out to people in my circle and having those conversations. But a lot of the feedback I got was, Jason, it's funny you're talking about doing this, because I was just talking with a client about this, or I'm thinking about doing this with my show. I encountered that more than I expected. So this may be fresh on your mind. And if so, this is the perfect podcast for you to be watching or listening to today. So let's talk about the rebrand of Podcasting Strategy Simplified, going from what was formerly known as Let's Blow This Up. So when I launched Bombtrack Media back in 2023, what happened was, at the time, I was known as, or my business was known as, Sircone Consulting. I don't know about you, but that just doesn't jump off the page. And even though it's my name and I've had this name my entire life, I was getting bored with that name. And it just so happened that at the time of me starting to have these feelings of, should I change this? Did I do this right? Did I not put enough creativity and thought into how I built my business? I crossed paths with the one and only Alexandra Watkins. Now, if you want to know more about Alexandra, you can jump back in the archives of this podcast, season 1, when it was known as Let's Blow This Up. Alexandra joined me. She is the founder of Eat My Words. Her book is called Hello, My Name is Awesome. Alexandra is the quintessential dynamo when it comes to creating sticky brand names that you can have a lot of fun with. She is the creator of Baconator, the famous sandwich at Wendy's. So she knows her stuff. And when I had the opportunity to bring her on my podcast, I knew that I was in the presence of somebody that really knew their shit and could really bring value to the audience. So we really dove deep into the importance of naming your brand something that's going to be memorable, something that's going to stick. And when we got done recording, I remember saying to her, yeah, I know where I'm at. I don't have that. And I know I want to make this change, but I'm not sure what I should do. And she said, no problem. I got your back. I'm going to send you my book. And she did. And I remember that book sitting on my shelf for a month and a half. I just didn't pick it up. I was still in that frame of mind of, do I want to do this? Is this really worth it? I don't know. I couldn't get there. Then finally I said, you know what? Yeah, I'm there. I don't want to keep going down this road. I really want to get something that stands out. How do I do that? Well, I've got this book here now. Let's see what happens. So I picked up Alexandra's book, and over the course of a weekend, managed to read it from cover to cover. I couldn't put it down. Amazing insight. And I think because it was such a fresh idea at the front of my mind, I knew that everything I was reading was everything I needed to hear in that moment. So read the book cover to cover, then started using the book as a reference point for all of the steps I was taking. And I was following Alexandra's steps one by one. How do you go through this process of rebranding and changing your business name to something that's going to stand out? As I was going through that process, a lot of names started to come to the front of my mind that I thought would be cool. I'd say some of them out loud, and the more I said them, the more I was like, ugh, I don't like that. There were some that really did stand out, and when I looked them up, they were already taken. And this is all part of the process. I knew this was coming. So over the course of about 2 to 3 months, I just brainstormed. What can I do? What works? What's going to be a good name for my brand? And one day at the gym, I was on the treadmill, and on my playlist, I have several Rage Against the Machine songs. They're one of my favorite bands. And the song Killing in the Name started. And I don't know why I made the connection the way I did, but it was probably not even 10 seconds into that song that I said, hold on, Bombtrack. That's a cool word. And that's the first song on Rage Against the Machine's first album. And I started thinking, that's really cool. I love that. And I started thinking, okay, from a podcasting perspective and all the things I do, how would this work? Bombtrack Media. Yes, I like this. And I think we got something here. So now I'm going through my workout, and the whole time I'm thinking, when I get done here, I'm going to look this up and it's going to be taken. Sure enough, it was not. I was blown away. I was surprised as hell that this was out there. There are a couple other companies that are just known as Bombtrack, but Bombtrack Media was wide open. So I started testing it with people I knew in my circle, and this is where I think I'm going. What do you think? Feedback was good. Feedback was positive. We like that. That sounds cool. That's neat. Yeah, there's a lot you can do with that. Before I even got to that phase, I remember continuing my workout and saying, oh, well, my podcast is going to be known as Let's Blow This Up. If I go Bombtrack Media, Let's Blow This Up. Perfect compliment, right? And it really tied into that axiom that Alexandra lays out in her book about the fact that if you've got a sticky brand name and something that's really cool, there's a lot of ancillary things that can spawn off of that name that are going to be on brand and really speak to the things that you do. So Let's Blow This Up, in my mind, was the perfect name for this show. So my biggest litmus test was to go to Alexandra and say, here's my thought. What do you think of what I've put together here? And if you go back and listen to that episode that her and I did together, the feedback is phenomenal. She absolutely loved it, to the point, and she mentions this in the show, that she uses Bombtrack Media as an example in some of the presentations that she does now. That to me was as flattering as it gets. I couldn't believe that she liked it that much, but it really told me that I was onto something. So Bombtrack Media became a thing. I got that launching off the ground. And then shortly after that, I launched Let's Blow This Up. And I was doing it in season-based format, mixing conversations about podcasting, mixing conversations about branding. It was a little bit of a mix of both to kick things off. And then I shifted full swing into podcast talk. And as we progressed through season 2 and then moved into season 3, everything started to become podcast strategy, podcast marketing. It really fell into the zone that I wanted it to fall into. But then, as time went on, I started to dig deeper into podcast SEO. And I started looking at numbers. And again, I know if you've listened to any of the past episodes when the show is known as Let's Blow This Up, I don't get wrapped up in numbers. I don't get consumed by them. But I do find them useful when I'm making decisions on where I need to go with my show. And I felt that the name, while it was the perfect complement to my brand, the title did not give you any idea of the context you'd find within the show. With podcasts, you want to have something that's clear and it tells a story, especially if it's for your business. The idea is that you are attracting people that you want to bring into your umbrella and turn into customers, right? So if your name is confusing, or if your name does not allow you to get discovered in a very organic way, then it's harder for someone to make that determination on whether you're the right person for them. So as I dug into this more, I started to question the name. Does Let's Blow This Up really work? I started playing with taglines and doing all of these different things because I know you as a consumer that's going to look for a podcast to learn more about podcasting. If you go to a search engine or you go to a podcast app like Apple Podcasts or Spotify and you're searching for podcasting, you're going to get a lot of returns, but not mine, because Let's Blow This Up does not speak to what you're looking for. So I felt that I was lacking that visibility simply because I didn't have the right name in the title. So I started thinking about this deeper. And when I really was at the point of this needs to happen, I think I'm there. However, I'm right on the cusp of going to PodFest 2026. When you go to Orlando, this is my conversation with myself, go to Orlando and go to some of the breakout sessions and the presentations that are talking about this subject. Learn more about the SEO factor and see if there's validation to be found in these rooms to get you on the right track. So that's what I did. And I shit you not, it was the first day. I attended 2 different presentations and heard exactly what I needed to hear. And the answer was just hitting me right in the face. Yes, this needs to happen. Podcasts today are being discovered in a very intentional way. You can go the cute route. You can have a clever, punny name, but you have to think about what you're trying to achieve. If you're doing this for your business and you truly want your podcast to be something that positions you as an authority, as something that can generate leads for your business, as something that can bring new people into your audience that might serve as referral sources, they have to be able to discover you. They have to be able to find you. And if you aren't positioning yourself for all of the podcast SEO discoverability, you're not going to get as much traction as other people in your arena or in your industry that are also leveraging podcasting to grow their brand. So I knew it was time to make that change. And here I am. I'm that guy. I'm sitting there making notes and thinking about ways that this can go. And honestly, this name that I landed on, Podcasting Strategy Simplified, had been staring me in the face for I don't know how long, because I had done a podcast in the past about, or it ended up being a season on an old podcast, but it was called Solo Podcasting Simplified. I had even done a course once called Podcast Guesting Simplified when I was doing more in that area of the podcast world. So this simplified approach has worked for me in the past, and I knew it was time to bring that into play again. And that was one of my biggest notes, Podcasting Strategy Simplified. And here we are. So the rebrand took about a month, give or take a few weeks, because I had a really, really clear idea of where I wanted this to go. Now, I can't speak to long-term success here because I just did this. So this podcast, as I stand here and I record this episode for you, this podcast has been rebranded for less than a week. Now I want to see how this grows over time. And I'm going to give it significant time. I want to give it at least 6 months before I really do a true evaluation of what this rebrand did for the show. This coincides perfectly because being part of the Podcast Professionals Association, I also have an opportunity to contribute an article to Pod News that I'm going to write about this very subject, because I'm hoping that this can reach more people that are having this thought run through their mind about, do I rebrand my podcast? Am I doing the right thing, or are there mistakes that I should be aware of if I go down this path? So this all works very perfectly and all flows together very nicely. But the point is, here we are. You are now consuming Podcasting Strategy Simplified. The rebrand is now in effect. I'm not going to call it complete because I'm still building on some things. And it's funny. I thought I made a list of all the things that I was going to need to update. And I thought that I caught everything, but it's funny. You think you wrote everything down. what I've discovered, there's a few things I caught one this morning. It's like, oh crap, it still says, it was in my email signature of all places. Still said, let's blow this up. So I had to change that. But there's a number of things that you'll catch along the way that you'll want to make sure you're updating and having in place. So if you're thinking about rebranding, again, there's a number of factors in play. I wanted to try to highlight 5 big ones that, in my mind, this is summarizing a lot of what I have been working on the last month since getting back from Podfest and really putting this thing into effect. So the first thing that I looked at, and again, this is something that I think this happened before the rebrand started, and this was what led me to go to Orlando and get validation on my thoughts, is you have to determine if your current name is serving your purpose, and it's going to serve your purpose for the long haul. The worst thing you can do is to continue to go down a road that's a dead end. And like I said before, if you're thinking about continuing to go down a path that you know is wrong, well, that's just a waste of your time. And I think one of the big reasons why we get caught up, and I feel like I'm jumping ahead as I say this, there's that sunk cost fallacy. And I'm combining my 5 things here. Number 1 is you look at that name, determine whether it's serving your purpose. And then if you do start to think about that sunk cost fallacy, this is number 2 of something you should be aware of. Don't let that be what drives your decision. You might be thinking, because you've spent all this time and all of this energy and maybe all this money into building a podcast in one specific name, that if you go away from it, you're going to lose listeners. You're going to lose followers. I think that it all comes down to communication. If your subject matter is still in the same arena as the audience you've already built, and you're continuing to deliver value with each episode you bring them, then you're going to be able to keep their ass in the seat. If you get to a point where you start changing things up and the content that you were serving them is now completely different and maybe on another subject altogether, that's when listeners may start to question whether your show is still for them. Now, they're hating you and they're going, oh God, what's he doing? What's she doing? No. People are very intentional about the podcasts that they're consuming. And if things start to change, they only have so many hours in their week to consume podcasts. So if you're not fitting the bill, then they're going to jump to another show that does satiate their needs. But if you're continuing to build content in that same arena, changing the name is not going to be something that causes them to leave. But you need to be clear in the communication that you deliver to your audience so they understand this is what's happening. The show is going to be called this, starting at this point. There needs to be some clarity that rebranding is coming, because if they wake up one day and if they're subscribed to your podcast, they're going to get a notification that says there's a new episode from whatever the new name is. And they might say, well, I'm not subscribed to this podcast. Maybe the curiosity leads them to click and see what's going on. But if they have an understanding that this show will be rebranded, you're going to eliminate all that confusion altogether, because they know it's coming. You can set the table and keep them in the loop. And this is something you should be thinking about anyway, is keeping your people in the loop. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more in a moment, but I do want to make sure that I am reiterating that the first point that you should be aware of is evaluating your name to make sure that it is serving your needs. If it's not, don't be afraid to change it, which blends in and dovetails with number 2. Don't let any sunk cost fallacies of all the time and effort you put into that name throw you off and make you think, I can't do this because I've spent so much time pouring my effort into the name that I currently have. If the name does not serve your purpose, there is no point in continuing to go down a path that will continue to be damning versus something that's going to help you grow. So the third thing you should be aware of, and I mentioned this before, is that podcast discoverability, podcast SEO. You want to make sure that you are setting yourself up to be found. And this goes from the search engines when people are looking for information on a certain subject, but also you want to make sure that you are setting yourself up to be discovered within the podcast apps themselves. Because as I said, people are very intentional about finding content. So if they go to your specific, or I should say, they go to the search part of their podcast app and they're searching for something on your industry, they're going to be very specific about what they're asking for. So the better you can do with naming your show something that fits into those keywords, the more opportunities you have for your show to be discovered. In addition, making sure that your notes are optimized and your show, or I'm sorry, when I say notes, like, I guess I should differentiate. I apologize. What I'm talking about is your show description. Your show description should also be optimized for search. It should be containing those keywords, maybe a couple long tail keywords as questions that people might ask as they go into the search engine function. Your show notes themselves, you can utilize those as well. However, they don't have the same impact as the show title and the show description. Your show notes should still do a good job of summarizing what the podcast is about. It should link to resources that you mention in the podcast. It should also link to episodes that are within your catalog that you reference. Make it as easy as possible for your listeners to find your show and then get sucked into a rabbit hole with your show. Because if you're mentioning past episodes and then you have a link to them directly in the show notes, they can go to it from there. Or if you're mentioning and referencing past episodes, make sure that you number or mention the number and then have those numbers in your titles as well. So start with a show name that's very keyword friendly. You don't want to keyword stuff. You don't want to make it look like 90 different keywords to where it just looks like you. My rule of thumb is this: if you can say your show name and it rolls off the tongue, then you've got something. But if you've got something that's super confusing to say and it trips you up every single time you say it, well, that's when it's time to reevaluate things. But you have to think about that show name first. The show art is something that we can talk about on another episode, but you want to make sure that you have something that looks good and that stands out so you grab attention and you grab somebody's eye. But that show name is going to help when they're doing that search. So you want to make sure you're adhering to the keywords in your industry and what you specialize and what you talk about on your show. And then make sure your show description is optimized in the same capacity. I'm going to talk about more of this in detail on future episodes, but these are something to definitely be thinking about when you go down that rebranding path. Number 4, I already talked about this as well, but I want to dive into it deeper. As I said, I was going to come back to this. Actively communicating with your audience and letting them know what is going to happen versus just flipping a switch and changing everything overnight. There's no reason why you shouldn't be having this conversation with your audience because they're the ones that consume your product. Talk to them about your mindset. I have a name on this show and I don't feel that it serves my purposes any longer. Here's where I'm thinking about going. I'm going to set up a poll or I'm going to set up a forum where you can provide me with feedback. I'd love to hear your thoughts. As a listener of my show, as a valued audience member, your feedback means the world to me. This type of communication should be happening with your podcast regardless, because you want to have that open communication with your audience. That's why on many of my past episodes, I've given away my phone number, my email. I'm very open to any type of contact with any of you in the Bomb Squad listening to this show. If you've got feedback, I want to hear it. I want to make sure that I'm doing my best to give you the very best production possible. As this show continues to unfold, I'm going to open up a couple new channels for that communication. But overall, as long as you're actively communicating with your audience and letting them know that you're going into rebrand mode, that's going to give them at least the initial steps, knowing what's going to happen going forward. Communication should always be near the top of your list when it comes to how you bring your podcast to your audience. So if you use those skills and you use those channels and you use everything at your ability to let your audience know what happens, you're going to be fine. So don't get lost in the, I don't know what my audience will do if I change my name. Communicate it with them ahead of time. Let them know it's coming. Don't roll something out overnight and you're going to be just fine. And the final thing I'm going to mention, this is completely up to you, but I think it's very important. And this is something that worked for me in this step was, as I was rebranding my podcast, I used it as an opportunity to look at my entire digital footprint and determine if I needed to make any other changes. So if you notice now, I went with this blue background combined with the black, yellow, and white of Bombtrack Media's. Those are my primary colors, but with that blue background, it really makes everything pop. And I used it across the board. So I made changes on my website. I made changes on my blog. I made changes on my YouTube channel. All of the thumbnails are now uniform across the Bombtrack Media YouTube channel and will continue to be. My next phase is going to my other YouTube channel, my @JasonCircone channel, and making the same changes there. I love that uniform look. And taking a step back to look at my podcast opened up some windows for me to say, you know what, now that I'm doing this and I'm in rebrand mode, what else needs a refresh? What else can I look at to get things all aligned? Because as people look at your brand, you want to have that uniformity across all of your digital platforms so they know it's you. And in no way, shape, or form should your podcast ever be different. Your podcast is a direct extension of your brand. So you want to make sure that everything aligns with the rest of what people can see. So they're making that connection throughout your digital footprint. No matter how they experience you, they are coming across your content, your information, your knowledge, your wisdom, your products, your services, and everything looks the same. If there are differences in the branding from one platform to the next, then it can become confusing. And people might not realize that this is the same brand that they've built a ton of trust in. So use your podcasting rebrand as an opportunity to evaluate the rest of your digital footprint and create something that is uniform throughout. It's going to serve you much better as you continue to build on your podcast and as you take your podcast content and utilize it for other methods of marketing and creativity and discoverability. It's going to put you in a much better position to excel. So there you have it. 5 things to be aware of as you go into rebrand mode with your podcast. That will do it for this installment of Podcasting Strategy Simplified. Bomb Squad, we are officially off and running with this podcast. I hope you had a great time, because I know I did. Until our paths cross again here on the show or anywhere else throughout the World Wide Web, my name is Jason Circone. This has been Podcasting Strategy Simplified. Until next time, stay explosive.